Good afternoon and welcome to this important and timely discussion on the EU's enlargement process concerning Ukraine and Moldova. I'm Anastasia Pociumban. I'm a research fellow and project manager at the German Council on Foreign Relations, where I lead a project in cooperation with the EU Commission on EU relations in its eastern neighborhood. I believe we are at the pivotal moment with the EU's decision to open accession talks with Ukraine and Moldova, and this has introduced a new dynamic to its enlargement and neighborhood policies. Both countries are at critical juncture, facing unique challenges as they seek to align themselves with EU standards amid significant geopolitical pressures, and including and specifically Russia's continued war of aggression in Ukraine. Today, we will explore these pressing issues through the perspectives of our esteemed panelists. We'll discuss the next steps in the accession process, the impact of the war on Ukraine's capacity to meet EU criteria, the implications for Moldova, and how this process influenced Ukraine's reconstruction. We will also examine what role the incoming Commission could play in shaping its path. And before we dive into the discussion, let me briefly introduce our distinguished panelists. Petra Gombalova Kyslingerová, she's the head of division for Ukraine at the European External Action Service, and Petra will provide us with the broader EU perspective on enlargement and geopolitical challenges. Igor Zaharov, he's a presidential advisor on EU affairs and strategic communications in Moldova, and he will share insights into Moldova's EU integration process, especially within its current security and political context and upcoming elections this Sunday already. Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze, Chairperson of Committee on Ukraine's Integration into the EU in the Verkhovna Rada. Ivanna will elaborate on Ukraine's progress and challenges as it navigates EU membership criteria amidst ongoing Russia's aggression. And Tomáš Kopečný, I hope I pronounced it correctly. Tomáš is the Envoy of Reconstruction for Ukraine at the Office of the Government of Czechia. And he will connect the dots between Ukraine's reconstruction efforts and EU integration, while also reflecting on Moldova's role in this. We only have 50 minutes, so we will have very brief introductions, and then I'd really like to engage you all into the discussion. It's also second last panel, so I hope you still have the energy. And I will start with you, Petra. Could you provide a broad overview of the EU's enlargement policies and how the geopolitical landscape, particularly Russia's aggression, has influenced the accession process for Ukraine and Moldova? How can the EU leverage its role as a geopolitical actor in the circumstances? And also, I know that's everyone's question, but your expectations of the new Commission, and especially your new head. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anastasia. I will start probably saying that accession talks and everything related to enlargement is dear to my heart because I was part of the team negotiating the Czech Republic's accession to the EU. So I know how easy this process is. I would like to start also saying that accession or enlargement of the EU was always regarded as a successful foreign policy tool, successful geopolitical tool, but also a successful transformative tool. On the latter, I was always not very happy when they were saying with the 2004 enlargement that they have transformed the EU transformed Central Europe because in fact the major reforms were done well before. And this is also connected to one of the important premises that the accession has to be driven from inside of the country. It cannot be imposed. As regards the geopolitical tool, I think that what we saw in the recent, like before the Russia's aggression on Ukraine, that there was probably a lack of energy in the accession discussions with Western Balkans, and this has changed. And I would say that it's very difficult to say that Russia's aggression brought something positive, but on the other hand, when we saw how the EU reacted very quickly to Russia's aggression and immediately took bold step, we saw that immediately a few days after Ukraine and Moldova presented the applications for the EU, accession. So we saw how important this is for the two countries, but also I think that Russia's aggression and the fact that also people of Ukraine and Moldova see the EU as their ultimate goal and guarantee was then maybe it was also realized at our EU side that indeed it's a powerful tool which has to be really used. And I think that, as you already said in the introductory remarks, the whole situation and the fact that we got under attack, our security got under attack, made clear that we have to not only like unite EU, but we also need to stretch the hands to our friends in Ukraine and Moldova and to basically respond positively to their European ambitions, which they already had. But I recall when I was negotiating the Eastern Partnership Declaration for the last summit so far, some of the issues like accession, integration into the market, it was forbidden word. It was very difficult to negotiate with our member states to have a decent, strong, like forward-looking declaration which would somehow at least partially respond to the demands of the people, their ambitions. And I think that I was quite proud when in June 2022 it was decided that Ukraine, Moldova, and also Georgia, partially with conditions, got the candidate status. And I think that we saw as well that EU was acting geopolitically. It was a sprint, you know, like suddenly things which were impossible became possible. And I think it was realization as well that we need to embrace this opportunity as well to make the EU stronger, to increase its political, geopolitical weight, its influence. That the accession means also increased competitiveness. It means also increased resilience of the EU, but also it's part of our security. And it's now very clear, nobody doubts that enlargement is part of the policy, it's part of our future, that the future of Ukraine and Moldovan people lies in the EU. So there is no doubt. Like 3 years ago, this was not possible. So now we are in a completely different situation. And I think that this is also testament of the fact that EU can act geopolitically when it can. Of course, we should not forget that the sprint, which was basically ended with opening of the negotiations and the real talks. We should not say negotiations because it's not negotiations, but accession talks. And now we are in a like real business, daily business with the screening, and also like when we see that we saw that Russia's aggression had a huge impact on the situation, of course, in Ukraine, also in Moldova. But when we see how well prepared the country, like especially Ukraine, I didn't take part in the Moldova's screening, but when we see how Ukraine is well prepared in some areas which it's almost impossible to grasp that this can be done during the war. And I think that this really requires huge appreciation that in addition to fighting the war, Ukraine is able to respond to the criteria, is able to respond to all the conditions, or is responding to the conditions of the accession. I would probably
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just have a very quick follow-up question. You mentioned the sprint. Is the sprint really continuing? Because I mean, I agree that I also see that Ukraine and Moldova is ready to reform, but is the EU ready to reform itself?
Yeah, I would say that now we come slowly from the sprint to the marathon, because the accession process will require some time. We have to go through the screening, you know, the technical areas. There is a precise steps in opening the chapter, so we very much hope that that probably next year the fundamentals can be open, but this still will depend on the results of the screening and discussions in the council among the member states. So then Tomáš comes in. So I would say that it's a marathon. Now from the sprint we came to the marathon, which requires thorough work. But what is important is that the Ukrainian and Moldovan people are really determined to go ahead. Also, we see that Parliament is determined to go ahead with all the reforms, the government, and it's extremely important also to realize that accession is not only the matter for the government, it's really overall society. So each of the citizens will have to give hand and do his part, or her.
Thank you, Petra, for this insightful overview. And now turning the situation on the ground in Ukraine. Ivanna, given Ukraine's ongoing war due to Russian aggression, how is this affecting the country's ability to really meet the EU membership criteria? And what do you think are currently the most pressing issues that Ukraine faces in its EU accession?
Let me start from really that appreciation of the decisions that have been taken on the level of the European Union, being ready to respond to something that was totally unimaginable if we go back to, I don't know, even December of 2021. And Petra just referred to her work on one of the Eastern Partnership documents, and I remember very well, you know, how we had to engage with all of our partners, like in the European Commission, in other bodies, trying to explain that we do want to have that prospect of European membership in our documents, and that was a taboo. Moreover, a taboo was also giving Ukraine weaponry. Taboo was also like even considering that there could be any changes in this approach. So unfortunately, it took the Russian full-scale invasion to reassess the reality and to understand that the desire of those people in Ukraine, in Moldova, in Georgia, and the work that those countries have been carrying out before that, is a precondition that could be already used in order to go further with Ukraine and Moldova. And I want to also refer to the bitterness that has been felt by Western Balkan nations, because they felt that Ukraine has received this candidate status for just political reasons. And I want to, you know, debunk that myth. Because if it wasn't for the association agreement that we have been carrying out, and everybody who was in that business knows that it was the most ambitious free trade agreement and political agreement with any third country ever done by the EU, that actually allowed us to fill in the questionnaire with some substance. So we did not fill up the questionnaire just to say we'll do everything in the future. So there was a very much political process, but also merit-based process altogether. But then on the merit-based process, we added the political will, and that was there. But I think also that we have received great political advances, both us and Moldovans and Georgians, by these decisions, also by candidate status and then by subsequent opening of the accession talks. And right now, I totally agree, it's about marathon. And here I see a couple of challenges. First, we have to preserve the dynamism of this process on both sides. On the side of the EU and readiness of the EU to actually be responsive to that willingness of the Ukrainian side, of Moldovan side, of other countries in the Western Balkans to actually facilitate the whole process. Also, I think we have to ensure, and that is something that worries us, we have to ensure that we would not become hostage with all our internal transformation to the unfinished business of internal reform in the EU. That is also something that should not be conditioned, as a process, because if we are ready earlier than the EU has dealt with its internal issues, then it should not. This unfinished business inside the EU should not become a obstacle for any of us to join. But obviously, our process of European integration is going on the backdrop of the most brutal war in not only in Europe, I think over the last many decades in the whole world, and obviously that means that our priorities are twofold. First and foremost, we have to ensure that we are capably protecting the country, that we have the country which will move on to join the EU. But secondly, also facing a very serious demographic challenge and institutional capacity challenge with people leaving the country, we have to ensure that we are not only going through the process of accession, but we are joining as a capable member that will be able to carry out all the responsibilities as a member state. And that is something that is not assured at this moment. And obviously the war is all the time making some changes in this process. Also, I think we have to be very honest when we are discussing the instruments which the EU will be ready to provide for Ukraine's accession. Obviously, we will do our job, and we are ready to compete with the, and use the instruments that are foreseen by the EU for all the candidate countries. But we also have to understand, and also I think have to agree, that beyond that, there will be other things that will need special mechanisms, resources, attention, devotion of the EU with regard to Ukraine. Because if we are thinking, for example, about environmental protection, the acquis is hard enough, is expensive enough for any member country. But when we are putting it on the top of that, all the demining challenge in Ukraine, or such things as Kakhovka Dam explosion, and then the changing of all the environment in certain region, that means it has to be addressed by some other instruments. And I think it's about honest discussion of thinking what are those instruments, whether it's Ukraine facility in some new format for the next financial period in the EU, and so on. And maybe just to finalize, Ukraine, while fighting the war, unfortunately, is also backsliding on some of the things that we thought that we have already protected and we have reached and we have ensure that they are irreversible. And I view the process of European integration as the remedy for making sure that even during the war, we can fix them first to the level that was already protected before the full-scale invasion has started, and later on taking from there to a higher level and higher stage. And I think this is doable, but here we need this bilateral, very sincere, very open conversation of friends with the willingness to fix things in order for us to be strong, competitive, capable, not only in our defense, but also in our future accession.
Thank you, Ivanna. Yeah, I think you rightfully pointed about preserving democracy, and also I think the efforts that people are doing in Ukraine to preserve it despite the war, and also that the EU's accession for Ukraine is important, but it's important to also look how it goes while the war still goes on. And talking also about backsliding, I think also we don't have Georgia today here at this discussion also because of its backsliding. And it shows how democracy is maybe not always a given, and we always have to fight. And that also brings me to Moldova. I think this is a smooth transition, but I think we also have crucial elections in Moldova this weekend. And it's not only elections of the Moldovan president, but it's also a vote for the EU referendum. So, Igor, I would like to ask you to a bit elaborate what are first the implications maybe of this referendum, why is it important that it takes place and what does it mean, but also how ready is Moldova for EU accession and where we are at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anastasia, for inviting me and us here, and I couldn't agree more with the previous speakers. I think, firstly, that Moldova has lost, and Ukraine perhaps, has lost too many opportunities. And in a sense, we have lost too many trains in our way of joining the EU. Because we've been speaking about the European integration, not since 2022, but back in time. But we don't have the time and the luxury to be indecisive now. We don't have the time to waste any more precious years and momentous that we have right now. And let's face, this is a reality. The EU enlargement was kind of an abstract and idealistic idea to many people, both in Brussels and in our countries. And now, an idea which was distant at the same time ago, it's kind of a necessity for all of us. Let's again be frank, I don't think that enlargement was the top portfolio in the Commission 10 years ago or 7 years ago, but look what happens right now. So we need to seize the momentum and work on this, because we have this window of opportunity, politically speaking, and I don't believe this window of opportunity will last forever. It will be closed someday. Now the window is wide open, but we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. That's why we have to be bold in our decision. And one of the bold decision was of Moldova's President Maia Sandu back 1 year ago in December 2023 to announce the initiative for the referendum of EU integration. For those who don't know, this referendum is not just a consultative mechanism of asking people whether they want or don't want to the EU. It's a constitutional referendum, which means that on the second day after the election, which is this Sunday, after the election and referendum, it will, well, assuming that it's validated by the Central Electoral Commission and the justice system, it means that the second day it will be in our constitution. And it's not just to put in a constitution a word that Moldovans want to go to the EU or want to accede to the EU. It's a whole bunch of the articles that will be changed after this referendum. Many people ask, why you're doing this referendum now? Because usually it is done at the end of the negotiation process, or negotiation talks, when the nitty-gritty of the process is agreed, and so on. And then you have to decide on the matter specifically. Well, and my answer is simple. We don't live in usual times. There is no longer business as usual. So we need to have bold, unusual decisions to the time that we live. And this referendum comes at a very crucial momentum when we have this political, as I said previously, window of opportunity, both in EU capitals, in Brussels, as well in Moldova, when we have all the three branches of the power, parliament, government, president, who are pro-European. The moodiness in the country is a pro-European, though we don't have direct military threats at the moment, thanks to the Ukrainian society and Ukrainian soldiers who bravely fight on the battlefield. We still have a different kind of war, a hybrid war, where the battlefield is everywhere, in our economies, in our societies, in our education, in our informational space, and so on. But nevertheless, I really want to invite everyone who is interested in how to counter this hybrid attacks, threats, this interference, bribing the voters, illicit funding of the parties, to come to Moldova, and you could write easily a 300 or 600 textbook page of how to counter this hybrid warfare. And it's indeed this Sunday, as you rightly point out, we have both election and a referendum, and the people of Moldova will have, because the previous panel was about American election, someone was mentioning that it's not about foreign policy, it's not about anything foreign. For us, it is, because people will have a clear choice, either to stay in a gray zone or to move forward with the European integration, with the European agenda. And no longer be at the periphery of the European Union, but inside the European Union. And there are lots of forces who try to derail the path that we have chosen. And I do hope that after this referendum, it will be clear for any political forces that would come to the power in the next years to Moldova that the choice of the people is clear and they will not be able to change this choice. What we are doing this Sunday is setting a clear and stable vision for Moldova, because we are done. We want to be done with this conversation of, do you really want to go to the EU? Is that a project of President Sandu, of your government? Or do your people really want to go there? Maybe not now, maybe later on. So we want to put a full stop on this process and starting right after the referendum to roll up our sleeves and start a real hard work by, starting a real negotiation on every cluster. That's our plan, and we hope this plan will be achieved. And indeed, Moldova is at the crossroads, and I think that this Sunday will make, every election, when we speak about election, we speak that every election is important, is a historic election. But what we have right now on this Sunday is a generational change. So it's either we stay in a gray zone or we move forward. And I hope that we will move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. It's again a crossroad. I would say it's always a crossroad. And also you pointed rightfully that Moldova's future also, I think, very much depends on the situation in Ukraine. And Ukraine has also defended Moldova from Russian army coming to the border. And I think also in the future, Tomáš, this also brings me to you. So also in the future, Moldova and Ukraine's connectivity and the efforts that will go for reconstruction are very important. And Ivanna, you also mentioned how important it is to focus also both on the EU enlargement, but also dealing with the consequences of the war, including Kakhovka Dam. And Tomáš, I would like to ask you, how do you see this the process of Ukraine's reconstruction and EU integration, how they are interconnected? And also, what do you see are the priorities for Ukraine's recovery, and how does these priorities align with the EU accession goals? And last but not least, how do you see also Moldova's efforts to contribute to Ukraine's reconstruction?
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be among such esteemed panelists and co-speakers and the audience. 3 grand questions. Thank you for those. I would say first that the most important thing right now is what Petra was describing and what Ivanna also mentioned, getting from the sprint mentality to the marathon one, not only mentally, not only in terms of the activity of the people working on the processes, but most importantly, getting from the emergency funding to long-term programming. Because what you see everywhere in Ukraine, like, which cities will actually have a better or worse winter this year? Like, in terms of how many combined heat and power units, how many cogeneration units, heat pumps, gas turbines will be delivered wherever. It depends on a single thing. Is the administration capable to write down projects so that they could get the funding, so that they could get the loans and less grants? But yes, we were getting into a lot of discussions about grants. But in general, all this depends on the particular administration's capabilities, which we call in the technical language absorption capacity, to write projects that will lead for the concrete city, region, town, to get something. I mean, there are many cities who don't have this capacity for many reasons. There are many regions who don't have this capacity. Sometimes because they don't feel the urgency to have it, sometimes because, they are used to do business differently, sometimes because too many people have migrated elsewhere, internally or externally. But the point is, who has an administration on the regional level, on the municipal level, who's capable of doing this? They will be, say, less worse, not great, not fine, but they will be able to help themselves. Less and less do I believe in the centralized solutions coming through Kiev. I believe that was one of the big, if not mistakes, then definitely lessons learned to really focus. It's in the mentality of the big agencies, the development assistance agencies and governments, to have a single point of contact and go to Vice Prime Minister Kubrakov and Mustafa Naim and his team. Point is, even at the peak of their activities, even at the peak of their, say, popularity within the system so that they could push through anything, they weren't able to do the bulk of what was necessary in the country. Not because of the lack of financing, but because of the lack of the administrative force that would be able to push it through to really get the projects from the table to the ground, to the delivery station. So I believe this is the single biggest thing that's very much connected with the European path. Because all of the European money, for instance, from the Ukraine facility, as was mentioned, is connected with the Ukraine recovery program, with the Ukraine reconstruction plan. Technically, meaning the priorities that are set in the plan should be corresponded by the projects that are being proposed. Now, we're talking about Ukraine facility and the 50 billion euros. But in reality, what are we really talking about? It's budgetary support, 39 billion. And then we have 7 billion that are supposed to start the business running in Ukraine by providing de-risking financial mechanisms for banks that will provide loans for Ukrainian entities that want to get something into their ownership, into their practice, precisely through writing these projects. So it's about loans. It's less and less about grants, about donations. It's really about what Ukrainian, not state, but municipalities, concrete actors, companies, state-owned companies, private ones, what they get a loan for so that they would pay it back. And this is the reality I see. And it's the reality that will be there, I believe, for the upcoming years. It's going to be about who's capable of doing business. And this will lead to the general state of reconstruction. And all of this reconstruction will have to be fully in line with the sectors, the substantial priorities, but also with the principles, with the form, with the way of doing things. Involvement of municipalities, of the local communities, so that they are fine with whatever new big reconstruction is happening in their region. Of course, rule of law, corruption. We can touch this. I mean, I get most of the questions in TV and in the media about corruption. Yes, it's an issue. It's worse than 2 years ago. But it's also something that is possible to fight through different mechanisms. There has never been, I believe, in the EU accession process, a faster country than Ukraine when adopting rule of law legislation on the central level. And in all those respects, really, kudos, bravo, chapeau. At the same time, though, it's about, again, absorption capacity on the lower level. Getting down from whatever is being adopted in the Verkhovna Rada to the practices by the municipalities, by the companies, because that's where the real issues are happening, at least in our experience. I mean, in the experience of the Czech government and Czech companies who are, by the way, one of the fastest and biggest in terms of investing, in terms of delivering things to even to regions where most of other countries do not dare to go. We are now supplying the Kharkiv city, for instance, with 35% of their decentralized energy units. Because again, not many countries or companies do go there. We have just opened 3 weeks ago the largest Czech investment so far, again into energy, wind power plant, 60 megawatts, 125,000 people are now getting electricity from this. So that would be my answer. And sorry for not connecting to Moldova, but we help Moldova in military ways, and we're ready to help them even more.
Yeah, I know. That's true. And I think you rightfully also made the links between the reforms that have to take place, and especially in terms of decentralization. I think this has also been key for the energy resilience of Ukraine. But before I have more questions, I'd like to, we have 10 minutes, so I'd really like to open the panel for the questions from the audience. So please raise your hand if you have a question, and please keep your question or statement for 1 minute, no longer than that. So maybe, are there any questions? Otherwise, okay, I have one. So I will maybe collect 3 questions if there are more, and then I give it back to the panelists. Please introduce yourself also.
Wow, that's a big mic.
Thank you. Rohdin Vonsavic, University College London. I have a question about the Ukraine facility and the sort of uptake in particularly small and medium businesses, because we know that a lot of them were really engaged in 2022 in the humanitarian outreach, and that translated into developmental assistance and also military support for Ukraine. This is something we definitely saw in Poland. We did a study on this together with the LSE. And we're seeing that now this engagement is driven by this horizon of European integration and the fact that there are also economic benefits to be reaped from this, but this social aspect is still there, that they still want to help. But I think that for a lot of the SMEs that we've studied, the Ukraine facility still seems like an ephemeral promise, and they are not quite sure how this would actually work in practice. So if you could maybe dispel some myths and provide a little bit of clarity. Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. I think there was a question.
Okay, thank you. Do I stand up? Greetings to the panel. I am Vepro Shehu. I represent women's rights organization Medica Kosova. Still, 25 years after the war, dealing with the consequences, supporting survivors of conflict-related sexual violence. And here I would like to address the issue of Kosovo still not being a candidate for EU accession, because we have we can talk a lot about the impact it has on survivors, on civil society, on ordinary citizens, this delay in really becoming a member state. Although we are Western-oriented country, and I think geopolitics is there to support our EU accession. And we are a great supporter of Ukraine, not only supporting refugees, but we think Ukraine and former Soviet Union countries are really, it's good that they can also be EU members, because I think we also have been a member of former Yugoslav country, and the moment there is a split of countries from federation, I think it's also a security issue to become an EU member state. We are still a very fragile security country, always been threatened from Serbia and from this, I would say, political approach to our independence and to our security issues. And I think the question is, do you think that Western Balkan countries, because of also security issues, should be, as soon as possible, member of EU, although we are really EU-oriented country?
Thank you. And there was one more question here. And then we go back to the panelists.
My name is Henry Alvarez. I'm a student at Charles University, and kind of also on the topic of states with limited recognition. In regards to Moldova and its ascension to the EU, what is the strategy involving the breakaway state of Transnistria? Because I know that one of the big things that the EU likes to focus on is that states that join are generally internally stable, and ever since the fallout or the dissolution of the USSR, that's been a long-standing issue with Moldova, and especially with the Ukraine war, a security issue with Ukraine. So I'm curious to hear about that.
Thank you very much. I'll go in the reverse order, and you have 1 minute or even less to answer the question. I think, Tomáš, I'll start with you. I guess you could pick up on the Ukraine facility, perhaps you or Petra?
Sure. So just very briefly, yes, it's probably going to be harder for SMEs. It's about BRIC programs. Now, it actually technically works in the way that, so you have this 7 billion that will be decided by tranches. First, you need an implementation actor, which will be the big IFIs. They will swallow the biggest bulk of the money. And so for whatever company who would want to succeed in or actually for the partner on the Ukrainian side who would want to succeed, they will be required to work through EBRD, EIB, sometimes World Bank, and also through the national development banks, the KfW, the BGK in Poland, through the Czech National Development Bank. It's hard. It will really depend on the company's capability to administer all this bureaucratic burden. So yes, definitely the system prefers the ones who will administer the big parts of the pie. And but again, there are, for instance, 10% bonifications for the de-risking mechanisms when it comes to SMEs. So when there is an SME, you get 10% off of the banking chart for whatever loan you're taking by the European Commission. The same applies to the regions that are mostly damaged or damaged in the most intensive way, the eastern frontline regions.
Thank you. Igor, I think you could pick up the question on Transnistria. How do you see Moldova's EU accession with Transnistria?
Thank you. That's really a good question. Well, first of all, we would like, and we are working to integrate or to accede to the EU as one integrated country together with Transnistria, the region of Transnistria and the Republic of Moldova. And we think that the process of accession to the EU is actually conducive to the settlement of the conflict, and we hope we will achieve the settlement by the proposed time of our accession. The reintegration of the country is already happening, though it's not publicly seen. We have started with the economic reintegration. We introduced a new custom code. Every goods now passes through the Moldovan borders. Now, you might be surprised to hear that, but 80% of the goods and services of Transnistria are exported to the EU. Like much more than the proper Moldova without Transnistria is exporting to EU, 60% versus 80%. So Transnistria is kindly integrated into economic span of the Moldova and the EU market, because when we had, by the way, of the association agreement, when we signed the association agreement, the DCFTA agreement, it transposed to the region also. So they benefited to the whole possible level from this agreement. And that, I think, politically speaking, they are more pro-Europeans than other problematic region of Moldova. And, not allowing Moldova, but in a theoretical scenario, when we come to the accession of Moldova and we still haven't solved the conflict, not allowing Moldova joining EU would be, because of this conflict, will be a big mistake from Brussels, because it will give Kremlin a veto power over accession. So we have to understand this. But we are optimistic that we will be able to solve the conflict while we're also negotiating our accession.
Ivanna, maybe you could pick up not so much on the question on the Western Balkans, but the interlink between EU accession and security. How do you see it?
First, I do hope that once we are ready for joining the EU, there will be readiness irrespectively of whether either Moldova or Ukraine or Georgia, for that matter, I also believe in Georgia, will be able to fully restore our internationally recognized borders. And I think that that's important to work on irrespectively what we are trying to do in the meantime. And that takes, again, political will on behalf of the European Union, and that is something to be addressed. With regard to security, I do believe that European integration is yet another layer of security that is working for any country that is engaging in that. And I also think that that's a security also guarantee for the EU itself. And by getting together, we are geopolitically going to be much stronger, geoeconomically going to be much stronger, and hopefully will be capably much more capable on the global scene. But maybe I should use this opportunity to underline that I do not, at some other panel with Petra today, we were discussing that the EU has signed a security agreement with Ukraine. I do not with all due respect and with all the gratitude of 30 security agreements that we've signed with different countries, I do not believe that that is going to be a guarantee for Ukraine. It's an important promise of support. It's an important promise of engagement and attention and devotion, but that's not a security guarantee. And that's why, if we are serious about security, it's about NATO enlargement and having Ukraine in.
Thank you. And last but not least, Petra, is enlargement revived also for Western Balkans?
Yes, thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for this question. And also, I would like to appreciate all your work doing on the sexual violence and survivors, because we are dealing with it also in Ukraine. And I must say that unfortunately, it's not really still recognized how damaging and painful it is for the survivors, all these atrocities which are happening. On the Western Balkans, indeed, I must say that this is what we also see, that after Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia put forward the application, we also saw the reinvigoration of the integration process at the side of Western Balkans. I can't, unfortunately, comment on Kosovo exactly. I know that you are a potential candidate country, but as we discussed, there are precise conditions to be fulfilled. It's a marathon, and one of the most important principles of all accession talks is the own merits. So each country is judged according to its own merits. So there are no shortcuts for Ukraine, for Moldova, or Georgia, or any other country. It's geopolitics, but merit also with their own merits. And I remember that I forgot to answer Anastasia your question on the new leadership and enlargement or accession. And I would just to reassure that from the words of President von der Leyen, enlargement will remain a core priority for the new commission as well. So I think this is also reassuring for Western Balkans, as it is for Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, with all the caveats.
Yes. Thank you very much. And with this, I would like to end this panel. And thank you so much. It was an honor to be here with you and to have this discussion. And we stay in touch. And I think we can continue it in a coffee break.
Thank you.